my son-in-law looked straight at me and said, "I'm selling your car, Mom. You don't need it." I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I just smiled. He didn't know what that smile meant. He thought I was agreeing. But that smile, that was the start of everything that came next. That car wasn't just something parked in my driveway. It was the last piece of independence I had left. My husband, Jorge, used to say, "Lissa, always keep your own wheels. When you can go where you want, you're still your own person." It's funny how you never forget words like that, especially when life starts testing them. Let me start from the beginning. My name is Melissa Rivera. I'm 68 years old, and I've lived in Asheville, North Carolina most of my life. For 35 years, I ran a little place called Rivera's Diner, the kind of spot where everyone knew each other's coffee order, and teenagers came in for their first jobs. My husband and I built that place from nothing but long hours and grit. We raised one daughter, Freddie, and poured everything into making sure she had a good life. When Jorge passed away 5 years ago, I sold the diner. The long mornings, the smell of bacon grease, the regulars who'd call me Miss Lissa, all of it became memory. I wanted a quieter life. I thought I'd earned that. Selling the diner gave me a little cushion. Nothing crazy, but enough to live comfortably and still help Freddie. When she and her husband, Chris, were trying to buy their first house, I gave them $60,000 as a down payment gift. I told her, "Honey, you and Chris are starting your life. Use this well." Freddie cried and hugged me. Chris called me a blessing. Back then, I believed him. For the first year, everything felt normal. We'd have Sunday dinners, and they'd drop by with groceries sometimes. But slowly, little things started changing. Chris was a planner by nature. Or, at least, that's what he said. He liked to organize everything. Bills, insurance, even my phone plan. He started saying things like, "Mom, let me handle this for you. You don't need to worry about these things anymore." At first, I thought it was kindness. But kindness doesn't take things away from you. It adds to your life, not removes it. One afternoon, Chris asked to borrow my car. He said he wanted to get it serviced. I handed him the keys. He brought it back spotless. Then, the next week, he asked again. This time, he said he'd keep the spare key just in case. I didn't think much of it, but it didn't sit right with me either. Little by little, my car, my blue 2015 Toyota Camry, stopped feeling like mine. Sometimes it wouldn't even be in the driveway when I woke up. Chris said he was taking it for a drive to keep the battery active. I'm not a fool. I knew something was shifting, but that morning, the morning he told me straight to my face, "I'm selling your car," that was the line. He stood in the driveway with his arms crossed, confident, almost casual. Freddie was standing behind him, quiet, her arms folded. She looked uneasy, but she didn't say a word. I looked at him and said softly, "You think I don't need it?" He smirked a little, like I'd just proven his point. "You barely drive, Mom. It's better to sell it while it still has value. You can ride with us when you need to go anywhere." That's when I smiled. A real small one. The kind you give when someone thinks they've won, but doesn't realize you've just started playing. He mistook my silence for agreement. But silence doesn't always mean surrender. Sometimes it's the sound of a storm gathering. After he left, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time. The morning light came through the blinds, striping across the stack of unpaid mail, and an old photo of Jorge leaning against the diner counter. I picked up the photo, traced my thumb over his smile, and said out loud, "You were right, Jorge. They're trying to take my keys." And it wasn't just about the car. It was about my life, my say in my own story. I made a fresh cup of coffee and sat there thinking the truth was I had let them take small pieces of me, one polite thank you at a time. Chris paying my electric bill. Freddie managing my doctor's appointments. Them saying, "You don't need to worry about this, Mom." I'd started believing them. I'd started acting like I didn't need anything, like existing quietly was enough. But that day, standing in that empty driveway, I realized something deep. When you stop needing things, people start treating you like you don't matter. I thought about my diner. All those years of people depending on me, listening to my advice, sharing their stories. I used to be someone people turned to. Now I was being managed like a piece of furniture. And it wasn't malice. That's the sad part. It was convenience. Freddie wasn't cruel. She was just comfortable letting Chris take charge, even when it came to me. Maybe she thought she was protecting me, but protection without respect feels a lot like control. That night, I sat on my porch, the mountains turning blue in the distance. My hands wrapped around a chipped mug, the same one I used to use at the diner. I thought about Jorge's last words before he passed. He was in the hospital, holding my hand so tight I could feel every bone in his fingers. He whispered, "Promise me, Lissa, you'll keep your independence. That's worth more than any check." And I promised him. I promised him then. Now, sitting there 5 years later, I realized I was breaking that promise. Chris thought he could sell my car, and I'd nod like a child being told what's good for her. He thought I'd accept being handled, managed, put away like an old coat. He had no idea what I'd do next. I looked at the empty spot where my car sat every morning and whispered, "Not yet. You don't get to decide when I stop driving, Chris." Because that car was more than a ride. It was the last piece of my life that was mine, and I wasn't going to let anyone sell that away. I thought family would protect that freedom. Turns out they wanted to sell it. After Jorge passed, I thought the hardest part of my life was behind me. I sold the diner, paid off the mortgage, and tried to build a calm routine. I cooked small meals, walked every morning, and went to church on Sundays. My world got quieter, smaller, but it was mine. When Freddie got married to Chris, I wanted to give them a good start. They were young, trying to buy their first home, and I still had some savings from selling the diner. I told Freddie, "You and Chris deserve a solid beginning. Here's $60,000. Just promise me you'll use it wisely." She hugged me tight and said through tears, "Mom, you don't have to," but I interrupted. "I know I don't have to. I want to." Chris shook my hand that day, smiling wide. "You're amazing, Mom. We'll make you proud." I believed him. For a while, things seemed fine. They moved into a lovely 3-bedroom house just outside of Asheville, near the park where I walk my dog every morning. We had dinner together every other Sunday. I'd bring dessert, usually my peach cobbler. Freddie would tease me that no one could make crust like mine. Chris would sit there talking about home projects, refinancing, new credit cards, things that never used to interest me, but seemed to keep him going. Then little changes began, so small I almost missed them. One evening, Freddie mentioned that Chris had gone through my utility bills. "He's good with finances, Mom," she said. "He could help you organize your accounts." I didn't see the harm at first. Paperwork had never been my favorite thing, and I trusted them. A few days later, Chris stopped by with a neat folder and a cheerful grin. "Mom," he said, sitting at my kitchen table like a banker, "I've gone through your bills. You're paying too much for insurance and internet. Let me handle these. I'll make sure everything's on autopay so you don't have to worry." I told him that was kind, but unnecessary. He insisted. "It's just easier this way. We'll keep track of everything from our end. I'll make sure nothing slips through the cracks." I remember thinking it sounded thoughtful, but also like I was being taken out of the loop. A week later, Freddie dropped by with groceries. "Chris set up joint access to one of your accounts," she said casually. "That way, we can help if there's ever an emergency." I asked, "Joint access? To my savings?" She looked uncomfortable, adjusting the strap of her purse. It's just for convenience, Mom. He's really just trying to make things smoother for you. I let it slide. I didn't want to seem ungrateful, but it didn't stop there. Next came my car. One Friday afternoon, Chris came over holding my keys. I'll take the Camry to get the oil changed. He said, you shouldn't worry about car maintenance at your age. I told him I could take it myself. I'd been doing it for years. He laughed softly. Mom, relax. You've earned the right to let people help. He said it with a charm that would have fooled anyone who didn't know better. He brought the car back that evening, clean and smelling like lemon. I thanked him. He smiled and said, I'll hang on to the spare key, just in case. It seemed harmless, but small things started to bother me. The way he'd say, Mom, like he owned the title, the way Freddie's voice went quiet whenever I questioned something. Freddie had always been my soft-hearted girl, the type who avoided conflict even when she should have spoken up. She'd say, Mom, don't make a big deal out of it. Chris just worries about you. Worrying, I thought, shouldn't feel like being fenced in. Once, when we were all at their house for dinner, Chris mentioned, you shouldn't be driving, Mom. It's not safe at your age. Freddie gave him a look, just a flash of disagreement, but he ignored it. You're 68, he continued. You don't need to be out on the roads. It's too much risk. I tried to laugh it off. Well, I've been driving since 1973 and no accidents yet. He chuckled in that polite way that really means you don't get it. That night, when I got home, I placed my car keys on the counter and stared at them. They suddenly looked like something fragile, like they could be taken away at any moment. Funny, I said to myself. How concern can sound like control when it's said too many times. From then on, I noticed Freddie shrinking in conversations. She'd start to speak and stop halfway. I'd ask her opinion, and she'd glance at Chris before answering. She wasn't the same. Maybe it was fear of conflict. Maybe she was just tired. I couldn't tell anymore. A few weeks later, I went to pay my property tax bill. I opened my checkbook and noticed something strange. The balance was off. I knew exactly how much should have been there. I keep track. Always have. I logged in online, something I'd learned to do after selling the diner, and scrolled through my statements. That's when I saw it, a withdrawal of $3,000. Not by me. Next to it, a note said, authorized by joint account holder Christopher D. Norris. My stomach dropped. At first, I thought it must be some kind of banking error. Maybe the system glitched. But the transaction was clear as day. I called Freddie right away. She sounded distracted. Mom, Chris probably moved it to handle the insurance renewal. Don't worry. Insurance renewal? I asked. That doesn't come due until September. There was a pause. Then she said softly, I'll ask him when he gets home. We hung up. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my living room, the TV off, the house quiet except for the sound of the clock ticking. I thought about all the little moments that had led to this. Every time I said, thank you instead of stop. Every time I let something slide because it felt easier than arguing. It didn't happen all at once. It was slow, like a blanket being pulled over me 1 inch at a time until I could barely move. And the worst part, it was wrapped in kindness. That's when I realized I was being managed out of my own life. It was a Thursday evening when Freddie called and said, Mom, Chris, and I want you to come over for dinner. We need to talk about your plans. Her voice was sweet, careful, like she was trying not to spook me. Something about the way she said plans didn't sit right, but I agreed. I always did. When I pulled up to their house, the smell of roasted chicken filled the air. The table was already set, cloth napkins, candles, 2 glasses of red wine waiting. Everything looked warm and inviting, but it didn't feel like family. It felt arranged. Chris greeted me with that polite smile of his. Hey, Mom. Glad you could make it. Sit down. We've got dinner ready. I sat across from them, my napkin folded neatly in my lap. They made small talk at first, about the weather, about Freddie's new coworker, about nothing that mattered. But there was something else sitting on that table, right between the salt shaker and the bowl of mashed potatoes, a thick folder of papers. It didn't belong at dinner. Chris cleared his throat halfway through the meal. So, Mom, he said, we've been looking at your finances. I put my fork down. My finances? He nodded. Yes, Freddie, and I just want to make sure you're set up for the future. We're worried you're spreading yourself thin. I looked at Freddie. She gave a small, nervous smile. Mom, we just want you to be comfortable. Chris opened the folder and pulled out a sheet of paper. We've listed your car for appraisal. The market's good right now, and honestly, it's just sitting there. I stared at him. You what? It's just an inquiry, he said quickly. Nothing's final. But if you sell now, you could invest the money, and we could help you manage it properly. I felt the air leave my chest for a second. You listed my car? He leaned back casually. Well, technically it's under your name, but we're helping you handle things. You don't really need it. Between Uber and us, you'll be fine. Freddie shifted in her seat. Chris, maybe we should. He reached under the table and took her hand. She felt quiet. I saw that. Then he pulled out another sheet. We also think it's time you moved into something smaller. A condo or assisted living. Your house is too much for one person. I looked him straight in the eyes and said, I've lived in that house for 32 years. It's not too much for me. He smiled like a teacher talking to a stubborn child. I know it's emotional, Mom, but practically speaking, it makes sense. You could sell, free up cash, and have us handle your investments, so you don't have to worry. Worry? He said it like I was some old woman counting pennies by candlelight. Freddie's eyes darted between us. I could see the tension in her shoulders. She looked trapped, torn between her husband's confidence and my silence. I didn't say anything right away. I just looked at the papers in front of me, charts, estimates, account balances. It was clear he'd gone through everything. My savings, my expenses, even the property tax breakdown. I'd never given him permission. He continued, Look, this isn't about control. We just want to protect you. You've done enough, Mom. You shouldn't have to handle all this at your age. At your age. It stung. Not because of the words, but because Freddie didn't correct him. She just looked down at her plate. I wanted to ask her, do you think I'm helpless too? But I didn't. I could feel Jorge's voice echoing in my head, something he told me years ago when we ran the diner together and a supplier tried to shortchange us. People will treat you how you let them. At that table, I realized I'd been letting Chris treat me like a client who'd signed away control. I hadn't drawn a single line, so I did what I've always done when the world tries to take more than it should. I went quiet. Chris took my silence as agreement. He started flipping through the pages, talking numbers, plans, timelines, as if my life were some kind of business deal. Freddie tried to smile through it, cutting little pieces of chicken she never ate. She was pale, lost somewhere between loyalty and guilt. I watched her. I wanted to tell her that she didn't have to stand by him just because she married him. I wanted to remind her that independence runs in our family, that her father and I worked our hands raw so she'd never have to ask permission to live. But I stayed quiet. After dessert, Chris said, I'll take those papers home with you, Mom, so you can review them. Just sign the consent forms whenever you're ready. I looked at him calmly and said, Thank you, Chris. I'll think about it. His smile widened, like he'd just closed a deal. That's great. I knew you'd understand. He stood up to pour himself another glass of wine. Freddie stayed seated, her eyes glassy. When he walked into the kitchen, I leaned toward her and said softly, "Freddie, are you okay?" She blinked fast. "He just wants to help, Mom. He worries about you." I said, "And what about you? Do you worry about me?" She looked down again, whispering, "Of course I do." Then Chris returned, cheerful, holding 3 small envelopes. "Before I forget, I've adjusted your accounts. Everything's centralized now. No need for multiple logins. I'll send you the summaries monthly." I nodded slowly. He put one of the envelopes next to my plate like a waiter leaving a bill. That moment, that simple motion, hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't a conversation anymore. It was a transfer. I felt myself slipping out of the picture, like a bystander in my own story. But outwardly, I smiled and thanked them for dinner. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I didn't accuse. Because sometimes silence is the only thing that unnerves people who expect compliance. After we said our goodbyes, Freddie walked me to the door. The night air was cool, and I could smell the faint scent of the chicken still baking. She hugged me tight and trembling. I whispered, "You don't have to agree with him every time." Her voice broke a little. "He means well, Mom. He just wants to make sure you're safe." I pulled back and looked her in the eyes. Safety shouldn't feel like losing your say. She didn't answer. She just nodded faintly, and I drove home in silence. When I got to my house, I left the envelope unopened on the counter. I didn't need to read what I already knew. They weren't helping me. They were replacing me. That night, I sat at my kitchen table again, the same spot where Jorge and I used to go over diner receipts. Only this time, it wasn't about money. It was about dignity. I made myself a note in my old recipe book, the one I still kept by habit. Stop being agreeable. Because the truth is, the more you let people help, the easier it gets for them to handle you, until you don't recognize your own life anymore. And that night, under the soft hum of my kitchen light, I decided something important. I decided that silence wasn't going to save me this time. That night, I barely slept. My mind kept replaying every word from that dinner table. The folder, the papers, the way Freddie went quiet when Chris spoke. I saw it all over again, each time I closed my eyes. By sunrise, I knew what I had to do. I poured myself a cup of coffee, sat down at the kitchen table, and opened the old address book I still kept in the drawer. My hand went straight to a name I hadn't called in years. Denise Carlton. Denise was more than just a lawyer. She'd been my friend back when Jorge and I first bought the diner. She handled the paperwork when we sold it. I still remembered her laugh and her no-nonsense way of explaining everything like you were sitting across from family, not an attorney. I dialed her number, half expecting it to be disconnected. But when she picked up, her voice sounded exactly the same. "Melissa Rivera? Lord, it's been forever. How are you?" I didn't dance around it. "Denise, I think someone's been meddling with my finances. I need to know what's mine and make sure it stays that way." She didn't waste a second. "Come by this morning. Bring every document you've got." 2 hours later, I was sitting in her office downtown. She still had that same framed photo of her dog on her desk and the same old coffee mug that said lawyers do it by the book. Denise put on her glasses and started going through my folder. She flipped through my house deed, car title, savings documents, all the things I'd saved from the diner years. After a few minutes, she looked up at me and said, "Melissa, everything's still in your name. Nothing's been transferred or sold. But I'll tell you this, if someone's accessing your accounts, they're setting up to take control later." That hit hard. She leaned back and said, "Let's protect you before anyone else gets ideas." We spent the next few hours reworking everything. She helped me open a new private account, separate from the joint one Chris had attached himself to. She arranged for my pension checks to be rerouted there and added extra verification on all transactions. Then she said, "Melissa, you need to update your will. Keep it clear. Keep it clean." We rewrote it right then. This time, it didn't just say what would go to whom. It said why. I left her office feeling lighter than I had in months. I wasn't angry, not yet. I was focused. Driving home, I stopped at the light near the corner of Maple and East Chestnut, the same street where my diner used to stand. The building's still there, now painted blue and turned into a bakery. The sign says Sweet Grace, and every time I pass it, I smile a little. I like knowing that something good replaced what we built. As I waited at the light, I saw a familiar face walking down the sidewalk, carrying 2 heavy catering trays. Rosa Perez. Rosa used to work at the diner back in the day, part-time while raising her daughter. Always on her feet, never complained, always grateful. I pulled over and called her name. She looked up, eyes wide, and laughed. "Miss Rivera, I haven't seen you in years." We talked for a few minutes. She told me she'd started a small catering business, but her car had broken down 2 weeks ago. She'd been borrowing rides or walking deliveries herself. "Sometimes I think the Lord has a sense of humor," she said with a smile. "He keeps sending me work, but not the wheels to get there." I laughed softly, but something in my chest tightened. I thought of Chris's smug face telling me, "You don't need the car." That's when it clicked. I asked her, "Rosa, if you had your own car again, could you keep your business going?" She nodded, a little shy. "Yes, ma'am. I'd triple my deliveries. I just can't afford one right now." I looked at her and said, "How about this? I have a car I don't need, according to someone who thinks he knows better. Let's fix that today." Her mouth fell open. "Miss Rivera, I can't take your car." "You can," I said, "and you will." She started to tear up. I told her to meet me at the DMV that afternoon. We met there at 2. I filled out the paperwork, transferring ownership to her for $1. She insisted on paying that single dollar, and I let her. When it was done, I handed her the keys. "Take care of it. It's been good to me." Rosa hugged me like I just handed her life back. She said, "You have no idea what this means to me." But I did know, because it meant something to me too. As she drove off in that blue Camry, I stood on the sidewalk watching her tail lights fade into the traffic. The car looked exactly the same, but it carried a whole new purpose now. It wasn't being sold for profit or hidden behind someone else's decision. It was useful again. It was going to someone who would appreciate it, not control it. I walked back to my truck, sat inside, and whispered, "Chris said I didn't need it. Maybe he was right, but someone else did. And that's what he'll never understand. I didn't do it out of spite. I did it to reclaim something invisible, my right to decide." That drive home felt different. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter, like I'd taken back more than a piece of property. I'd taken back me. When I pulled into my driveway, the empty spot where the Camry used to sit didn't look lonely anymore. It looked like freedom. I sat there for a while, staring at that space. I thought about Freddie. I wondered what she'd say when she found out. Part of me hoped she'd understand. Another part knew she probably wouldn't. Not yet. But one thing was certain. I wasn't going to sit quietly anymore while someone else wrote the script of my life. By the time Chris came looking for that car, it was long gone, just like my silence. It was 2 days after I gave Rosa the car, when I heard the sound of tires crunching up my driveway. I looked out the window and saw Chris's black SUV pulling in fast, too fast. The door slammed before the engine even stopped. He marched toward my porch, jaw tight, face red. I knew before he even opened his mouth what this was about. "Where's the car?" he barked. I opened the front door slowly, keeping my voice calm. "You said I didn't need it." I told him. "So I gave it to someone who does." His face twisted. "You what?" "I gave it away," I said again. It's gone. He stared at me, trying to decide if I was joking. Are you serious right now, Melissa? You gave away a $10,000 car. I folded my arms. It wasn't about the money, Chris. It was about ownership. You decided for me. I just made sure you couldn't anymore. At that moment, Freddie's car pulled up behind him. She got out, clearly nervous. What's going on? She asked, looking between us. Chris spun toward her. Your mother gave away her car. She's losing it, Freddie. She's throwing away everything we've been trying to help her manage. Freddie froze, caught between us. Her eyes darted from his face to mine. Mom, please tell me that's not true. I met her gaze steadily. It's true. I gave it to Rosa Perez, the woman who used to work for us at the diner. She needed it to keep her business running. Chris laughed sharply. So you're just handing out cars now? That's insane. I stepped closer to him, my voice steady but firm. No, Chris. What's insane is thinking you can take something that's mine and call it help. He shook his head, his tone growing louder. You're being ungrateful, Melissa. We've been taking care of your bills, your insurance, my life. I interrupted. You've been taking control of my life. Freddie took a step forward, holding her hands up. Please, both of you. Let's just calm down. Chris turned to her. Freddie, talk to your mother. She's giving away assets like it's monopoly money. This is exactly why we needed to handle things for her. That was it. I'd had enough of being spoken about, like I wasn't standing right there. I turned and walked inside the house without a word. I could feel both of them watching me from the porch. I went to my desk drawer, opened it, and pulled out a manila folder I'd been keeping there. It held every document Denise and I had gone over. Proof of every withdrawal Chris had made from my account, the letter from the bank confirming the unauthorized transactions, and Denise's legal note making it clear that all of my assets were under my sole name. When I came back out, they were still standing there. I set the folder down on the patio table. Chris frowned. What's that? Proof, I said simply. He reached for it, but I stopped him with one look. Don't touch it. Just listen. I pulled out the first paper. 3,000 withdrawn on June 18th. Another 2,000 on July 10th. Both from the joint account you added yourself to without my permission. Freddie's hand went to her mouth. Chris, what is she talking about? He started shaking his head. That's not true. I moved those funds temporarily to pay bills. I held up the letter from the bank. The bank confirms they were transferred to your personal checking account. Freddie's face went pale. You told me Mom approved those. Chris's voice cracked a little. I did it for her. She doesn't understand how to manage these things. I was protecting her money. I took out the last document, a copy of the letter Denise had sent, stamped and signed. You weren't protecting me, Chris. You were testing how much you could take before I noticed. Freddie looked like she wanted to disappear. Tears welled in her eyes. She whispered, Chris, please tell me this isn't true. He turned to her, defensive. You're believing her over me now, after everything I've done for us. That was the moment I saw it, the shift in her expression. The doubt, the heartbreak, the realization that she'd been standing next to someone who'd been using both of us. I looked at her and said softly, Freddie, I gave you $60,000 to start your life, to help you build a home and a future. But this man has been using you to take from me. Chris started to interrupt, but I raised my voice just enough to silence him. You have a choice to make, Freddie. Right now, you can get in that car and leave with him, and I'll know where we stand. Or you can stay here, and we can start fixing what he broke. The air went still. Freddie stood frozen, her hands trembling. She looked at him, then at me. Her lips parted like she wanted to say something, but no sound came out. Chris's face twisted with anger. You can't make her choose. You're manipulating her. I shook my head. No, Chris. I'm giving her back her voice. Something you took a long time ago. He glared at me, then at Freddie. You know what? This is ridiculous. You both deserve each other. He stormed down the driveway, yanking open his car door. The engine roared as he backed out and sped off, tires squealing. Freddie stood in the doorway, tears streaking her cheeks. She whispered, "Mom, I didn't know." I looked at her for a long time before answering. Maybe not, but you looked away when you should have asked questions. She started crying harder. I thought he was helping. I thought I was doing the right thing. I stepped past her, my voice soft but certain. I've already regretted staying quiet. Sweetheart, I won't do it again. She didn't follow me inside. She stayed there, standing in the open doorway, staring at the empty driveway where his SUV had been. That night, after she left, I sat on my porch and watched the stars come out one by one. My hands were steady, my heart calm. I didn't know what Freddie would do next. Maybe she'd go back to him. Maybe she wouldn't. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of the answer. I knew some people would say I went too far, that no mother should give her daughter an ultimatum, but others would say it was about time someone did. And maybe that's the point. Some choices break you. Others save you. I had given her both the truth and the freedom to decide what came next. And as I looked out at the dark road, I wondered, had I just lost my daughter or finally saved her from a man who was slowly taking her away from herself? That question stayed with me long after the night went quiet. 3 weeks passed before I heard from Freddie again. The silence was heavy, but I didn't chase her. Some lessons take time, and I knew she had to face hers without me trying to fix it for her. One Saturday morning, there was a soft knock on my door. When I opened it, Freddie was standing there, her eyes swollen, dark circles under them. She looked smaller somehow, like the fight had gone out of her. "Can I come in, Mom?" she asked. I stepped aside and nodded. She sat down at the kitchen table, the same spot where everything always seemed to happen in this house. For a while, she didn't speak. She just stared at her hands. Finally, she said, "I left him." I didn't react right away. I let her speak on her own time. She took a shaky breath. "You were right, Mom. Chris was using me. He took out loans under my name. There's almost nothing left in our savings. He even maxed out one of my credit cards. I didn't see it until after he left. I wanted to say, 'I told you so.' I wanted to say, 'You should have listened sooner.' But that wouldn't help. Instead, I reached across the table and placed my hand over hers. 'All right,' I said softly. 'You're here now. That's what matters.'" She started crying then, the kind of crying that comes from shame, not just sadness. "I feel so stupid, Mom. I let him talk me into everything. I thought I was being a good wife. I didn't realize I was disappearing." I squeezed her hand. "You're not stupid. You trusted someone you loved. That's not weakness. That's just human." She nodded slowly, wiping her tears. We sat in silence for a minute before I said, "We'll fix it. It's going to take time, but we'll fix it." That afternoon, I called Denise. She didn't even hesitate. "Bring Freddie in Monday morning," she said. "We'll sort through every document." When Monday came, we sat in Denise's office for hours. She walked Freddie through every account, every loan, every statement. Denise was calm, professional, but she didn't sugarcoat anything. "Freddie," she said, "this will take some work. We'll dispute the fraud, close all joint accounts, and rebuild your credit. It won't be overnight, but it can be done." Freddie nodded, her eyes red but determined. When we left the office, she said quietly, "I can't believe how blind I was." I told her, "People like Chris are good at sounding right. That's their trick. They wear confidence like a uniform, but confidence isn't the same as character. She didn't answer, but she took my arm as we walked to the car. It was the first time she'd done that since she was a teenager. A few days later, Rosa stopped by. She had a big smile on her face and a foil-covered tray in her hands. "Miss Rivera," she said, "I brought you something." It was a pan of baked empanadas, golden, warm, smelling like comfort. She told me her catering business was taking off. She'd gotten 3 new contracts and had started saving up to rent a small kitchen space. "All because of that car," she said. "I couldn't have done this without you." I laughed. "No, Rosa, you did it because you work hard and don't quit. The car just made the road shorter." Freddie came into the kitchen while we were talking. Rosa turned to her and said, "Your mom changed my life. I'm hoping to do the same for someone else one day." Freddie smiled politely, still quiet. After Rosa left, she said softly, "She really needed that car, didn't she?" "She did," I said, "and now she's helping other people because of it." Freddie nodded and looked down. "I think I understand now why you did it." Later that week, Freddie started helping Rosa part-time. Rosa needed someone to keep track of her invoices and taxes, and Freddie was good with numbers. It gave her purpose again. Every evening she'd stop by after work and tell me about their day, how they'd delivered to a church luncheon, or how Rosa's daughter was saving for college. The laughter came back into her voice a little more each day. It wasn't the same as before, but it was healing. One afternoon, as we were folding laundry, Freddie said, "Mom, I never said thank you." "For what?" I asked. "For standing up that day. I hated it in the moment, but you were right. I needed to see him for who he was. You didn't just save your money, Mom. You saved me." That one hit deep. I put the towel down and said, "You saved yourself. Honey, I just showed you where the edge was before you fell off." She smiled faintly. "Still, thank you." That night, I sat out on the porch with a cup of tea. The evening breeze was cool, and the world felt quieter than it had in months. I thought about everything that had happened, the shouting, the paperwork, the tears, and now this slow rebuilding of something fragile but real. I thought about Rosa driving around town, building a business out of grit and gratitude. And I thought about Freddie sitting next to her, learning that independence doesn't mean doing everything alone. It means knowing when to protect your own peace. I realized something, then sometimes you lose people to teach them what they need to find in themselves. My heart still ached for the way things had gone, but I felt something else too, pride. Not in being right, but in not giving up on myself. As I watched the last bit of daylight fade, I whispered to myself, one daughter lost my trust. Another one, the one I'd once helped wash dishes, reminded me what it feels like to be valued. It wasn't said with bitterness. It was truth. A few days later, Rosa dropped off another tray of food. This time, Freddie was the one who baked it with her. They laughed together in the kitchen, comparing recipes. The sound filled the house in a way I hadn't heard in years. Light, genuine, peaceful. I didn't need to join in. I just listened, smiling quietly to myself. The storm had passed, but it left behind something new, a kind of calm you don't get without walking through fire first. Life wasn't perfect, but it was honest, and that was more than enough. A full year passed before I realized how far life had come since that day in the driveway. Time has a quiet way of healing things when you stop fighting the wrong battles. These days, my mornings start slow. I sit on my porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sun rise over the Asheville Hills. The world feels calm again. No drama, no control, no tension waiting behind a phone call. Just peace. Freddie still visits every week, but it's different now. Healthy. She's stronger, surer of herself. She and Rosa have built something beautiful together. A small meal delivery business called Blue Ridge Table. They cook homemade meals for busy families, and from what I hear, they're booked weeks ahead. Rosa runs the kitchen, Freddie handles the numbers and clients. The two of them are quite the team. Sometimes they stop by after work with leftovers, big trays of food, laughter in their voices, the kind that fills up a home. I sit back and listen to them talk about new orders, recipes, and plans for expansion. Seeing my daughter excited again feels like a small miracle. She told me one day, "Mom, I used to think strength meant staying quiet and keeping the peace. Now I know it means standing up, even when your voice shakes." I smiled and told her, "Now you sound like your father." As for me, I bought a used pickup truck, nothing fancy, but mine. I paid cash for it, signed every paper myself, and parked it right in that same driveway where all of this started. I call it my freedom truck. Every time I drive it, I feel that same rush I used to feel running the diner, the satisfaction of doing something on my own terms. People in town often stop me to ask about Rosa's catering or Freddie's business, and every time they mention it, I can't help but feel proud. Not the kind of pride that comes from money or success, but the quiet kind that comes from knowing you stood your ground and it mattered. Sometimes I think back to Chris. I haven't seen him since the day he drove off angry. Denise told me he tried to challenge some of the fraud filings, but it didn't go far. Everything was documented. Every signature, every withdrawal. Truth has a funny way of holding its own. I don't hate him. I'm long past that. Hate takes too much room in a heart that's worked hard to heal. If I've learned anything, it's that peace isn't something you find. It's something you build one boundary at a time. People always talk about revenge, like it's about getting even. But the best revenge isn't loud or cruel. It's peace, the kind that doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. I remember telling Denise one afternoon, Chris wanted to sell my car, but in the end, he sold something far more valuable, his integrity. She laughed and said, "And you bought yourself peace in return." That's exactly what it feels like. Now, on Sundays, Freddie and Rosa deliver meals to the church seniors group, a program they started themselves. Rosa drives that blue Camry I once owned, still running strong, still spotless. When I see it parked in front of the church, I feel a quiet pride. That car has carried more purpose in its second life than it ever did sitting in my driveway. Sometimes Freddie and I talk about everything that happened, not to reopen wounds, but to remind ourselves how far we've come. One evening, she said, "Mom, that day in the driveway, I hated you for making me choose. But now I thank you for it every single day. It was the only thing strong enough to wake me up." I told her, "You were worth waking up for." She hugged me and whispered, "So, were you?" We stood there for a moment, quiet. It wasn't forgiveness in words. It was forgiveness in understanding. I think women my age learn this lesson the hardest way, that you can love your family deeply, but still need to protect your peace fiercely. You can help them, guide them, and give to them, but you can't let them erase you in the process. I lost things that year, trust, comfort, my old car. But I gained something bigger, my voice, my boundaries, my freedom. So here I am, sitting on this porch with my cup of coffee, looking at that same empty spot where the Camry used to be. Only now it's not empty. It's a reminder. When someone tells you that you don't need something, maybe they're not talking about the thing at all. Maybe what they really want to take is your power. If I'd listened to Chris, I would have lost more than a car. I would have lost myself. But instead, I took that moment and turned it into a new beginning. Life doesn't hand you strength. It gives you choices. And when you start choosing yourself, people call it rebellion until it works. Then they call it wisdom. So if you've ever been told you don't need something, your car, your job, your home, you say, I want you to remember this. Your independence is not up for debate. And to every woman listening right now, whether you're in your 60s or your 90s, it's never too late to reclaim your keys, whatever they stand for. Because sometimes freedom isn't about getting back what was taken. It's about finally realizing you were capable all along. Before I go, I want to thank you for spending this time with me. My story isn't just about standing up to someone else. It's about standing up for yourself. If you found a little strength or peace in it, do me a favor, like this video, share it with someone who might need a reminder that dignity never goes out of style, and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. And tell me down in the comments, if you were me that day in the driveway, would you have given your daughter that choice? Or would you have stayed quiet and hoped she'd see the truth herself? I'll be reading your stories, because every woman has her own version of a car someone tried to take, and every woman deserves to keep her keys. Don't forget to download this wonderful book called 38 Uplifting and Funny Short Stories for Seniors. Easy-to-read tales that bring laughter, memories, and mental stimulation. It's full of heartwarming, simple stories written to bring a smile, stir up memories, and remind us that joy doesn't fade with age. It grows stronger. You'll find it in the pinned comment below. Now, if you like this story, go ahead and click on the next video appearing on your screen, because in it is a story of betrayal and revolt like you've never seen before, right here on Her Kindle Stories.